What up, guys? So today's podcast is going to be, it's going to be based on Robert Drysdale's new book. He sent me the book. We've had him on the podcast before to talk about his other books, which I enjoyed. I know some people very much dislike them, but I think they're important. They get at some of the history of jiu-jitsu. And there is an idea that he talks about in this book about some of the important contributions of jiu-jitsu to MMA. And then also kind of one of the reasons why modern BJJ kind of sucks for modern MMA. And so again, this is something where, jiu-jitsu people, our sport has basically, MMA has evolved and BJJ has evolved, and they haven't evolved necessarily together. And if you look at things like wrestling, like the sport of wrestling, wrestling's evolved, of course, but wrestling has remained a dominant base, a dominant art inside of the MMA ring and cages. Now, again, everybody uses some little bit of jiu-jitsu inside of MMA, right? Even if they don't know that they've been influenced by it. A lot of times people have been influenced by jiu-jitsu no matter what, right? Jiu-jitsu changed the landscape of fighting, period. Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And so that's there. But again, talking about the evolution of the sports, because our sport has changed a lot in the last 30 years. And so Robert Drysdale talks about one of the reasons why that happened. And it kind of starts back in 1975, based on his ideas, which I think are probably pretty reasonable, because basically they set up an incentive structure to support the changes that were going to happen. And they did it sort of unknowingly. They had other intentions. But again, it's one of these things where when you look at human drives, humans are more motivated by incentive structures than they are by punishments. Punishments obviously can work in some cases, but giving someone a ladder to climb, humans that they're more motivated by that than anything else. And this is why, when you look at even the way our government does things, or the way companies do things, or the way that the society does things, when you start placing incentive structure in front of people, you have to be careful, because that's what they're going to work towards, because you now just gave them a ladder to climb, and that's what they're going to try to climb. And sometimes it works out great. Sometimes it doesn't work out great. And a lot of times it has unintended outcomes. We'll say it that way. But anyway, I'm not going to rant too much about that. Let's get into the podcast. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. You can check them out at charlottesweb.com. They make a lot of terrific products. They're one of the OGs in the CBD space. They also make a lot of other products like CBN supplements, which are great for supporting your sleep. They have functional mushroom products like lion mane and reishi and things like that. I tend to focus on the stuff that they offer that is focused on recovery. As you get older, you're always trying to improve your recovery. And again, I've used CBD products and some of their other products for the last 8 years or so, off and on. And again, I think that they help me support that function, right? Right now, I'm taking one of their sleep supplements, which I find useful, and so I take it for that. So if you guys want to check out any of their stuff and save some money in the process, their website is charlottesweb.com, and the promo code is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order, CHEWJITSU 30. So if you're curious about what they have, what kind of effect it'll have on you, because supplements affect everybody a little differently, right? Check out charlottesweb.com, and the promo code is Chewjitsu30 at checkout. Also, thanks to our buddies over at Epic Roll. They've been a longtime supporter of the podcast. They make some terrific jiu-jitsu gear. Great people, great customer service, good designs, good quality stuff. I get my rash guards and shorts made through them. So if you guys ever get some of my stuff, it's made from them as far as the rash guards and shorts are concerned. But again, they're I honestly think the rash guards and shorts are the most comfortable ones that I've ever worn. As far as grappling stuff is concerned, I've worn a lot of stuff from a lot of different companies. I like the fit and the feel of Epic Rolls better than I do anyone else. And I say that with absolutely no hyperbole. That's just me. Again, maybe your body's shaped a little bit differently, but for me, being a stocky guy, it's hugging my arms in the right places. It's not too tight. Some rash guards are really tight in the upper chest, which again, that doesn't feel comfortable. And sometimes the fabric's kind of weird. Someone from it's a big company in jiu-jitsu, they sent me some stuff and I tried it on. I felt like I was wearing a wetsuit. Did not like it at all. And so again, I'm a big fan of their stuff. They've got great t-shirts and stuff too. If you want to check out any of their gis, t-shirts, rash guard shorts, whatever they have, you can check them out at epicrollbjj.com, and the website, or the code, on the website at checkout is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. Also, if you guys want to support the podcast directly, you can roll on over to our Patreon which I'm sure you guys know how Patreon works. It's just a place where people like the content and they want to support it. They can do it there. And if you go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, you can get access to the exclusive content that we do there, plus some other perks. If you want to get a list of the perks, you can check it out at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And we appreciate you guys for supporting us the way that you do. Also, thanks to you guys who follow my daily email. And if you guys want to join it, you can check it out at jujitsu.net /join, JOIN. And when you do, I'll sign you up for the daily email, and you'll also get access to the free ebook and video guide that I give away called Focus Jiu-Jitsu, which is focused around giving you strategies on improving your training faster through open rolling, but with more deliberate focus, because the focus is the big thing you're going to need. You're going to need to be more focused if you want to improve faster. And it'll give you 12 or more different strategies on how to do that. And I do it in both a video and also a guide, a book that you can read, so you can kind of choose what you want to do. But super useful, very helpful. And then again, you get my daily email afterwards. And so you can get that at jujitsu.net/join. With that said, guys, let's get into this podcast and talk about why modern BJJ sucks in modern MMA. What up, guys? So today's episode, we're going to talk about why modern BJJ is, why it sucks so bad for modern MMA. Now, I want to make a quick distinction here, okay? Because sometimes things get a little murky. When we talk about modern MMA, I'm not talking about like a hand-to-hand street fight situation on the streets with some guy that doesn't know anything, because that's a completely different ballgame. When you're talking about modern MMA, you're talking about people that know stuff. They know, they train, you know, maybe at the amateur levels, maybe not trained so much, but they know at least a little something. But like, you know, we're talking about good fighters in MMA. Those guys know stuff. When it comes to untrained people, you know, I still think you can, a lot of this doesn't really apply to it, because if you've, and this is just something, because there's so much talk about what we're going to get into now about like jiu-jitsu losing its fighting roots and so forth. And some of that is true, but I can tell you, if you've ever had an encounter with someone that's never fought before and you're on the street or whatever, it is, I'm not going to say that it's always going to go great, whatever, but I can say, generally speaking, it's laughably easy to control someone because they have no idea what they're doing. You can watch plenty of videos of like jiu-jitsu white belts and blue belts who have awful takedowns, literally taking people down and controlling them and fighting them in a situation. Then you take like a really well-trained jiu-jitsu practitioner and they just can completely control the person with no issues whatsoever. I just know that there's always this, you know, everybody, it's like modern politics. It's so friggin' exhausting. Everybody wants to take a side on, just do whatever you like doing. But I do want to talk about it because it's a little bit of jiu-jitsu history. And it's kind of understanding, you know, this incentive structure that was created that led to the birth of modern jiu-jitsu. Because until I read Robert Drysdale's books, this is his third book I've read of his. We're going to be talking about that, by the way, guys. We're going to be going off the notes here from this book, The Triumph of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 50 Years of a Martial Arts Revolution. And you know, he's pulling from a lot of like original documents, like apparently a bunch of these, and we'll have him on a podcast soon. A lot of these like different like documents and these flyers and these newspaper articles that he's pulling from the Brazilian sources. A lot of these were like digitized, right? Because before they were in some archive somewhere. Now they've been digitized. He's able to use them for the book. And so the book's full of like pictures of like these different things, and which again kind of supports the claims, some of it that where he's talking about, you know, the mythology that was given to us, the storyline, the timeline of everything that was given to us was kind of not true. Again, you could disagree with it, and he kind of he keeps having to go through the book when you're reading it. He's like, look, I'm not anti-Gracie. He's like, I'm just like, you know, you're just laying it out there for people. He's not saying anything bad or negative, and he actually talks pretty highly about guys like Elio and Hoist and all these guys that laid the groundwork for us to do what we're doing, right? That said, in the book, there is a theme that runs through it, right? Because he's talking about this evolution of jiu-jitsu, because many of you may not know this, but I didn't know this until like a couple of years ago. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when we use that term, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, that was not a thing until like, especially Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was not a thing until the 90s when like the UFC came around. Before that, it was just Jiu-Jitsu. And even talking to, I remember Ricardo Laborio, talking to him, he said, like, back in the day in Brazil, they didn't call it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they just called it Jiu-Jitsu. And when you look at Jiu-Jitsu and Judo, Judo is basically a product of Jigoro Kano, who took mainly two forms of Jiu-Jitsu and sort of combined them together to make this grappling art, right? That became judo, and tried to make it more sportive and more about education. I mean, Jigoro Kano is basically the father of martial arts as we see them, right? Where you basically divorced it slightly from this like warlike fighting element and made it more about like, personal development and education, and about not just improving your ability to, throw someone or choke someone, but to improve yourself as a person, right? He's like the birth of that. That's the guy, right? He sort of helped create this, and we're in debt to him. But in jiu-jitsu, back in Japan back in the day, there was like tons of forms of jiu-jitsu. Some of them would be more about weapons, some were about strikes, some were about grappling. They all had different forms. It's basically just think of like jiu-jitsu as martial art. And they would have like different Japanese names, and I don't know the language, so I can't speak it, but basically, so forth, jujitsu, so forth, jujitsu, and these were to signify what they were. But again, jiu-jitsu then comes to Brazil, judo comes to Brazil, and it starts to morph. And for a long period of time, the judo jiu-jitsu that the Brazilians were doing was basically just bad judo. It was just basically that. It was just judo that wasn't done as well as some of the Japanese people. But in 1975, they had a rule set, which Drysdale sort of says is like kind of like the birthplace of what we, as modern jiu-jitsu people, would consider the birthplace of our art as we see it now, right? So as an example, in 1967, he goes through this in his book. He says basically the rule set was this. It says a complete takedown was 1 point. Mount was 1 point. A back take was 1 point. General superiority was 1 point. And fleeing the mats was negative points. Okay. So you see that you're just getting 1 point for everything. So there's really like no big deal. So you're just getting points for this. Here's the rule set for here. In 1975, just as an example, because there's a lot of rules here that we don't necessarily need to get into, like, because I'll have to ask questions about this. Like, it says like defective mount. I don't know what the hell a defective mount is. I'll have to ask him about that. But a footlock mount is worth 4 points. A back take, getting to back mount, was a 4-point move. Belly's 3, takedowns 2, guard passes 2, a sweep is 2 points. And holding a position for longer than 30 seconds was 2 negative points, which I thought was interesting. But basically, around this time, you had this departure from just standing techniques. This is where the ground became more important. And, this is where they're starting to incentivize the groundwork. And there's no disincentive for pulling guard. Right. And you think about that, every martial art, as far as grappling goes, that I can think of, it's never a good idea to fight off your back. Right. It's always seen as a bad thing to fight off your back. Jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, changed that. It'd be like, no, we can fight off our back. And, at the time they were doing all these Vale Tudo matches. And in Vale Tudo, a lot of times the way that it would work is, some of the guys would use guard to tire people out. If you were a smaller fighter, you might use a guard position to sort of chip away at the person until you could get on top of them and choke them or something. Elio Gracie, he has a quote from him basically saying that he doesn't fight. When he fought in Vale Tudo, he wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting not to lose. And it was this idea of like slowly chipping away at the person and then kind of coming back. Maybe not everybody's favorite way of looking at it, but that's what was happening. And so you have these big incentives with jiu-jitsu to take the back, to get to mount. And this created a few different things. Both one of the reasons why jiu-jitsu can be really effective in MMA, and also the seeds to why it became not very good for MMA. So we'll talk about the good first. One of the positive things is that with that 75 rule set, which kind of gave us the it sort of began, it's the beginning of what would eventually become our rule set, right? Because it's pretty darn close to what we have now for like the IBJJF style competitions. It created this incentivizing of getting to position and dominating and basically working up to things like mount to back mount to getting to these positions. And when you look at the position before submission sort of ethos of jiu-jitsu, that is a jiu-jitsu thing for us, right? Is basically we, submissions are obviously great, get them if you can, but otherwise we're always working to pass the guard or sweep and get on top and pass the guard and then get to side control mount, back mount, and you are advancing the positions. Why are you working to those positions? What's the big deal? Because all of those positions in a fight situation allow you to have control of the person and to hurt them and punch them and so forth, right? That was the whole idea behind it. That's the reason, right? When you look at martial arts in some aspect, they're trying to have the sporty element, but they're trying to have a fighting thing in the background. Even wrestling and sambo and all of it, it's all the same. Judo's the same way. You talk to judo people, they're big on the fact that they think it's a superior art for self-defense because you start standing and you can do a lot of judo takedowns from standing, just like straight up standing, boom, you throw the person, trip them, whatever. So you have this working of getting to dominant position and working towards mount or back mount to where you could do more submissions or punch the person and strike them. So that's a good thing. That is something that jiu-jitsu, did. And Robert Drysdale also he lays it out in his book too later, is that probably what he believes the most important contribution of jiu-jitsu to modern MMA is the back take. There's no other art that does back takes like jiu-jitsu. Like we are the premier martial art for taking someone's back and choking them. It's what we do best, better than everybody else.
Yeah.
Obviously we play guard and stuff. We'll talk about guard in a second because it has some issues. But when it comes to when you compare wrestling, you compare sambo, judo, which is our cousin, right? Judo players don't play like we do. A lot of times in judo, if the person hits the ground, they'll turtle up and they'll shell up in a ball and they'll just wait for the ref to stand him up because the ref kind of has this ability to simply just arbitrarily stand up the match whenever they want because they think that the action stops. So what you typically see in a judo match is if the person ends up on the ground, they go for these really quick, reckless submissions. They just have to dive on something. And they don't have that systematic approach because they don't have the time to do it. Judo is very much focused on being standing up. Now, if you look at pre-war judo, was a little different, but it still didn't have the emphasis on the back that we do. But, you still had a lot more groundwork going on pre-World War II judo. And so the back take is what he considers to be the big contribution because you look at, even if you've never done jiu-jitsu, you look at all the fighters, they understand taking the back is a good idea, right? And you can see people taking the back, going for it, regardless of whether or not they've ever done jiu-jitsu much at all. Now, here's the part where it sucks, right? He talks about this in his book that basically with that rule set that was put in place in 1975, it created a lot of conditions that helped improve jiu-jitsu for a fighting aspect for, these Vale Tudo matches. But the negative side is that it slowly created a grappling style that did not incentivize the takedown that much. And it put a higher emphasis on guard work because you can drop to your guard, you can be on your back, and you don't have to worry about it being a negative thing, no big deal. So you can basically not do takedowns and sweep the person, get on top of them. And it led to the creation of what we see now in jiu-jitsu, which if you watch a jiu-jitsu match, there's just, the guard work is incredible. The things that people can do with these intricate positions is simply phenomenal. And now that's great for competitive jiu-jitsu. But for a fighting situation, like lapel grips and leg lassos and spider guards and inverted De La Riva, so forth. So all that stuff sucks for MMA because as soon as you got punches being thrown, well, buddy, it changes.
Yeah.
For a fighting situation, you basically have, in most cases, you got full guard and the variations of that. You have half guard. Got a little bit of maybe butterfly guard, right? Where you're kind of holding really close on the person. That's about it. Maybe a little knee shield action. That's about it. That's about all you're going to be able to play with strikes being thrown reliably. I'm not saying that people have never done anything. I'm not saying people have never inverted, but just generally speaking, those are your mainstays. Those are going to be the ones where you can keep control, keep things tight, and at the very least negate damage. And so his idea is that you had this art where takedowns were not incentivized, guard work and back takes were. And so what happened? We got really good at taking the back, which is good, but our takedowns started to come down generally as a whole. And then you have a lot of intricate guard work. I've talked about this many times on here and even with my students. When you think of most matches with point-based competitions, they are, especially like an IBJJF rule set, which is typically the norm. Like ADCC has its own rule set, but when you look at IBJJF, the IBJJF rule set is basically the same rule set or some close variation to like, NAGA, AGF, and all these other, they all kind of follow the same thing. It's kind of universal. 4 points for back, that kind of thing. That's the rule set. That rule set's been around since I was a white belt. Well, with that, you basically spend a lot of time working on your guard because matches in those cases are almost typically won off of the guard pass or the guard sweep. If I pass your guard and I get those 3 points, boom, like I'm in a great spot, and you probably spent a ton of energy trying to stop that. Likewise, if you sweep and get on top of me, man, like I'm in a bad spot now. And so a lot of matches are won and lost in that guard pass, guard work position. And, that's not a bad thing for competitive jiu-jitsu, but when you think of an MMA fight, modern MMA, that's not where you spend the bulk of your time. Because like what happens? You're starting to punch people and you're taking them down, and you might be fighting from turtle because the person's trying to get up or whatever. There's a lot of different situations going on that aren't necessarily this intricate, complex guard passing stuff. Now there's guard work that the passing stuff can be very useful. And again, the passing has to change. You're probably not going to be doing a bunch of standing far out passing. You're probably going to be doing very tight chest to chest style half guard passing, things like that. And so his idea is that the guard work that we have developed, this amazing ability, has led to the weakness that you see in modern MMA with modern jiu-jitsu. Now, again, I said there's a distinction between fighting in a street situation with untrained people. And I make that distinction because, again, most trained people aren't necessarily going to fight. I mean, there could be some. Most of the time, if you're in a street situation, if you've got to defend yourself, it's more than likely going to be against someone who has not trained. And so you're going to be fighting against a person that doesn't know how to defend these things. And so it's a lot easier to deal with them versus, say, a person that has trained and knows what they're doing. That's a different situation. And in modern MMA, you're not dealing with people that don't know what they're doing. And like when you watched hoists come in early on, and a lot of the early jiu-jitsu practitioners who would just mop up with their guard, they were fighting people with the technology they didn't know anything about, didn't know it existed. Like, what the heck is this guy doing? And then quickly people figured it out. And then, wrestlers came in. It was the first wave of MMA was basically, and back then it was called NHB. It was either Vale Tudo or NHB, no holds barred.
Yep.
But MMA was a term that got sort of it was a term that got created in America so that they could kind of polish it a little bit to make it, because at the time all these different politicians and scumbag people in the Senate and every Congress and everything else, they're trying to stop MMA because they think it's just barbaric and brutal and so forth. Meanwhile they're doing terrible things and sending people to die for stuff, but we're the bad ones for wanting to do the sport of combat, right? And they came up with this term MMA to get it away from the origins that it came from. Because if you remember the old UFCs, everybody's sitting out there, it's no holds barred, whatever. We didn't say Valley 2, but we call it no holds barred, like, one man enters, or two men enter, one man leaves. And it was just this blood sport. And they were trying to make it more professional. They gave them gloves and the whole deal, and they try to make it more professional. But MMA's changed, and then you saw the wrestlers come in, and the wrestlers started dominating, and, the jiu-jitsu guys would kind of come back and forth, and you had strikers that knew how to use some of the guard work to negate some of the strikes to get back up to the feet. That was your first three waves, by the way, in NHB and MMA, was jiu-jitsu people. And then it was wrestlers who could avoid the submissions and just basically pound people out. And then it was strikers who learned how to stop takedown sprawl and use a little jiu-jitsu on the ground with the guard work to stop it. And then after that, it really became a mix. After that was over, like all of a sudden, it just starts getting all over the place, right? And so when you look at the arts, like let's say wrestling as an example, wrestling is pretty dominant in MMA, right? And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not
Yeah.
if it's not direct wrestling, it's some form of wrestling, or sambo. Like you have like some of the Khabib people, they have their sambo stuff that they do, but it's wrestling is the dominant sport in MMA. And like, why is that? It's because the emphasis on takedowns. There's a lot of stuff that you do in wrestling that you will not do in an MMA fight, that you will not do in a fight on the street. But the emphasis on grabbing someone and taking them to the ground and getting on top of them lends itself to being able to punch them and do damage, which is again the idea. And so I think it's an interesting thing. We're gonna have him on the podcast soon to talk about it. But going through the book, that was one of his big ideas that threads through it, is that our martial art that we consider Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really started to its infancy began in 1975 with the creation of this rule set that was put together by the Gracies and other people to create this competition federation. And then with the explosion of really, you would think the IBJJF for it, the IBJJF and its predecessors, when they came onto the scene, they blew up the competition scene. They created this huge jiu-jitsu competition scene that's incredible. It's grown so much, and it's divorced itself in a big way from the reality of fighting that it was originally tied to. Because every all of a sudden the gentleman's agreement of hey, this would need to work in a fight was kind of given away, because that's how we all looked at it back in the day. There was a lot of stuff that you could do, but it was always kind of seen as like there's this gentleman's agreement of like, you still want your jiu-jitsu to be able to work in a fight, so you won't use this stuff. Well, when all of a sudden you can make your living and you can make a way of life for yourself just doing jiu-jitsu, well, that stuff went out the window. You're like, well, hell, I can just do jiu-jitsu. I don't have to do this MMA stuff. I can just do jiu-jitsu, make my living, and I'm going to go for competition glory. And so all the gentlemen's agreements were off the table, and you're just doing competitive jiu-jitsu, which there's no strikes. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And so I think it's an interesting idea to think about, and it kind of explains in some ways how we got here, how we got to this. And again, I don't say this as any negative, because I think there's a lot of pros to modern jiu-jitsu. And when I say modern, I don't mean that you have to be flipping upside down and bending in half, shooting for leg locks. I consider modern jiu-jitsu all the stuff that basically is divorced from a fight, where if you were sitting in a gym and you're sitting there playing like some spider lasso stuff, or whatever, or you're doing some different things that, like, if you think about it, like, oh, I would totally get punched in a fight right now, you're kind of getting away from the essence of just the reality combat part. Then you're just playing the game, which I think is what most of us like doing anyway. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, I agree with this idea that that's how we got where we are. Now, there's some stuff in the book that I disagree with, or I have questions, and we'll hash that out later on as we have on the podcast.
Yeah, I think Hoist initially, like, jiu-jitsu was just so much more evolved. Nobody knew what it was, essentially, and Hoist, being the smaller guy, would use guard as a survival. Like, I mean, he did submit people from his guard because they kind of didn't know, they panicked. But he used it more as like a survival tactic. There's like who do you go against?
Chemo?
Chemo was a perfect example.
Yep.
Chemo had some wrestling. He had some grappling, but like,
he's big.
And he was big, way bigger, way stronger. And Hoist used guard to survive.
Yeah, he's pulling his hair and like,
yeah, well, closing the distance, right? He's keeping him from at least hitting him as much. And I think guard can be, I would say guard in MMA is kind of like turtle. You think of it that way. Like, you want to be there for a little bit, but it's more of like, you got to do something, get out of there, right? It's not a good position to stay in.
Yeah.
I would, you know what I mean? Like in jiu-jitsu, being in turtle is like, dude, the clock's running. You're going to get your back taken, or something bad's going to happen to you. Same thing in guard, like closed guard in an MMA fight. I think it's kind of like one of those, like, use it to maybe nullify some of the damage and pick your shots to get out of that position. And the other thing is, I think the point you made is jiu-jitsu is not evolved with modern MMA. So, like, I feel like with the takedowns and stuff, like, you still have the same rule set from 1975, and that rule set
it's changed a little bit, but yeah, the essence is still there.
Yeah, like, you saw a perfect example of somebody using old school jiu-jitsu. It was Chrome Gracie in an MMA fight, and he just pulled guard and just got pummeled. because he was willing to stay there. Now, again, the other thing is when the UFC first started, it was no time limit. So you could kind of hang out to some extent and hopefully your opponent tires themselves out. And then
Right.
when it's time, they're so exhausted, you get a decent looking sweep or something like that. You can, or get on top, scramble up, things like that. So jiu-jitsu hasn't quite evolved. And then, like we talked about, when people know jiu-jitsu, wrestlers started to learn how to stay out of some of these submissions, these basic submissions from bottom, and they were able to kind of stay safe and kind of grind people out, which was why we had that wave that you mentioned.
Yeah. And, that's like the idea of turtle. It's interesting because, they've changed a little bit with IBJJF, right? Where if I take you down and you go to turtle, if I maintain control of turtle, I get my takedown points. But
which I think you should.
I think you should, right?
I think
if you were saying that you want to keep it somewhat connected to the reality of a fight, being in a turtle position is awful.
Horrible.
I mean, I can tell you from I had several of my MMA fights where I did a lot of damage to the other person from turtle because the person's turned away from you and you're in a position where you can generate some serious force. And I can punch you from several different angles. Obviously I can punch to the side, but a lot of times I can punch right up behind you. That's like how Dan Henderson knocked out Fedor. He shot that punch right up the middle, up underneath of it. So, he's in turtle and boom, you shoot it up behind him, straight up the middle. It's like an uppercut. And so, it's not a good position to be in. And so you even think about wrestling, you get really good at learning how to control that turtle position. Instead of taking the back, you're just controlling turtle. And in jiu-jitsu, you can control the turtle or you get good at taking the back and getting onto their side. But from a striking standpoint, you can do some serious damage from that position. In one of the fights, actually, I remember afterwards, in the heat of the moment, you don't think about it. You're just fighting. It's like, we're both fighting each other, right?
Yeah.
Kill or be killed kind of thing. And I remember I was fighting this guy and I'm hitting him just all over the place from turtle position. After the fight was over, his whole side of his face where I was punching him was all swollen and busted up. And I'm like, you kind of feel bad about it, but you could see the damage afterwards, right? Dude, the whole side of his face is busted up from being in that turtle position too long. And so, again, that's just another one of those ideas. It's one of the reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of the ADCC rule set because of this emphasis on turtling. Basically, anything that I do in ADCC, if we turtle, doesn't count. It basically negates everything. I always think that's stupid because turtle is not a good position to be in if we're talking about a fight standpoint, right? And I think ultimately that's everything that we do. All these are all precursors to a fight. That's really what they are.
Is there a preferable, if you end up on bottom, if you're using jiu-jitsu, what guard would you, rubber guard maybe? Because that's kind of Eddie Bravo's whole thing was to control the distance. So rubber
if
guard,
you play rubber guard, I mean, that's to me, rubber guard is the variation of full guard.
Yeah.
So
what do you think is the best guard to play on bottom?
I don't know. That's up to the person. That's going to depend on the person. When I would play, I would typically play full guard. And then I would start to a lot of times if I was on the bottom, I wasn't trying to stay there. I was trying to work back up, right? So I was trying to get back on top. And so I only ended up on my back once in an MMA fight. I trained it a lot. And I have a whole punch blocking series that I know how to do. And I remember having a guy one time, it's a long story, but basically it ended up with me telling him putting some gloves on him, some boxing gloves. And I was like, here, try to punch me in the face. I'm going to be on my back. You try to punch me in the face. And he couldn't punch me in the face because I knew how to maneuver my body around. Now, he was not a good MMA fighter or anything by any stretch, but, I know how to do some stuff. And that typically we would involve getting overhooks and then working to where you use your knee shield and feet on the hips to basically keep them out of distance from punching and then working your way back up. And that was what my sort of focus was. That was what I was trying to do the most. And then, like I said, there was a time where I did in that same the fight that I'm talking about where I ended up on my back, I was blocking the punches and did a butterfly sweep on the guy, because essentially what happened was I went for a big swing, went for the punch, he took me down and I swept him and got on top of him, so, I think, again, it always depends, but I think it basically you're limited to butterfly, half, full. and the variations thereof, right? And like the slight changes that you can make with them and things like that. But that's, I think, kind of what you're limited to, because those are the ones where you can keep some tight control. Most other guards are going to involve, having this mid-range distance. Now, again, it's not to say you can't play some leg locks or do some inverted stuff, because there's always exceptions to the rule. But again, it's a rule for a reason, and the exceptions exist. But again, they're exceptions because they're not the rule. They're not what's normally happening.
Yeah. It's just I'm thinking about, like, yeah, it depends on what type of guard you play. So like you're saying you preferred in closed guard double overhooks, which makes sense, right?
Double overhooks or overhooks with like an overhook and a back of the neck.
Yeah, just because to keep them, because you can kind of block your head essentially.
Yeah,
you can block
that's it, because I've got your overhook, and you can't do anything with that. Your other hand on the other side, I'm basically putting this arm up over your head, and what that does is that controls your posture, so you can't raise up to punch me or press away from me. And then at the same time, it allows me to block my head, so you can't hit my chin or my head. Now you can totally drill my body, and punch me to the body, but at the same time, it's like, you're in an MMA fight, so you kind of sometimes you have to kind of go in and accepting that you're going to get hit, and you kind of have to decide, kind of pick your battles. And I'll allow someone to tee off a little bit of my body from a non-postured up position, which really isn't that bad, versus them being able to posture up and pry away from me and then really deal some serious damage.
Do you think jiu-jitsu's, and here's the debate, here's a question, is jiu-jitsu the best self-defense martial art? Or I guess maybe that's different. Let me ask it this way. What's the best base for MMA? And then what's the best base for self-defense? I think those would be different, right? Because self-defense is usually more likely, if you have some jiu-jitsu and your opponent does not, then I think you can get away with more stuff. Versus MMA, most people are going to be skilled to some extent in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. I think when you're talking about style versus style, like, let's go back to that real quick. If you took people that knew nothing about the other, and you did style versus style, jiu-jitsu wins, because of the submissions and the groundwork we have, and that emphasis on hierarchy of getting to certain positions, right? The groundwork element that we have. That's what that is our premier thing that we do. It's what jiu-jitsu guys do better than everybody. But when you take that and then say into a fight situation, well, then for me, like, thinking about it, and again, I'm biased. I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, so whatever. Sure. But I think, you're looking at it from that standpoint, saying, okay, well, you don't want to fight. You want to get away from the situation. But if you said you had one to choose from, you only get one. I'm assuming for me, it's going to be doing jiu-jitsu, training jiu-jitsu that involves having takedowns. I'm not saying you got to be like a college, you don't have to be a college wrestler doing them, but you should have takedowns, because if you're thinking about self-defense, you have to have takedowns, both takedowns and defenses, because people, even if they don't know how to do them, they're probably going to try to grab your legs and take you down and tackle you. That's a pretty human thing. I mean, hell, I remember in high school when we would watch people fight, you would see people trying to grab legs. We used back in those days, I remember people would just say they scooped up their legs. I remember, like, someone did like a really ugly double leg, but guy had terrible balance and he got knocked off his feet, and they're like, damn, he scooped him. And so, like, it was horrendous to watch, because they didn't know any wrestling, but they just, you figure things out. So I think if you have jiu-jitsu that get style versus style, jiu-jitsu was like that. It's probably going to be jiu-jitsu that's the winner. So I think jiu-jitsu is probably a great art for learning basic control and defense. Now, again, you still have to understand that, if you go into a jiu-jitsu gym and the only thing you do is pull guard and like invert upside down, well, then you're probably not going to have great defense for yourself if someone ever like gets into a fight with you. You should know some of the basics of like full guard and being able to do takedowns and so forth. And then, like, after you have that basics down, then it's like, you basically spend most of your time doing basic jiu-jitsu or fun jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu, playing the game. That's what we do. That's what's fun to us. I think ultimately, this is just my personal take on it. A lot of the arts where, they spend all their time focusing on some self-defense situation that never happens. It's like LARPing. It's like they're just, you remember the LARPing? Like, it's like the
dress
the
up.
guys. Yeah, they dress up like, knights and armor and stuff like that, and they basically go play. It's like, and again, I'm a nerd, so I'm a geek too, so I make no bones about it. But they'll dress up in like stuff and they'll reenact Dungeons and Dragons campaigns in person. They're throwing beanbags at each other, screaming lightning bolt, that kind of stuff. That's what that stuff looks like to me. Cause I'm thinking like, like for instance, you'll look at a Krav Maga school, which is all about like focusing on the stuff. And it's like in the more affluent neighborhood, it's surrounded by like all these gated communities. It's like, when's the last time you've been in a fight, huh? Like, when's the last time you've been in a fight just ever? Like, come on, it's not happening. Like when's the last time you've ever, like most people like that do jiu-jitsu, they're training, at least in America, right? You're training in a place where for the most part, we do have an effective rule of law. You don't have people just being trampled left and right out in the streets, no matter what the media tells you and shows you. So you live in a place where like most people don't fight on a regular basis. And so if like jiu-jitsu, if sport jiu-jitsu didn't exist, I would be so bored with it. Like it would be so boring if I was only getting ready for this fight that's never happening. Now, again, I have had to use jiu-jitsu a couple times and wrestling a couple times in fighting situations outside of a sanctioned event. And it was fine. It was easy. It was because the people didn't know what the hell they were doing. Like it's not hard. But I think a lot of times just self-defense stuff is just LARPing. They're just making stuff up because these people aren't fighting on a regular basis. They're like saying, well, what happens if this happened? And if the guy had this and we had to do this, like how many times have you actually stopped a knife attack? Like I'm not saying that you haven't, maybe you have, maybe you've talked to someone that has, maybe the people have got information, but like you get these people that are just making stuff up. It's like the Dusty Dale guy from Detroit where, he's just got all these like
Dust.
stupid, he's making all these fake technique moves and doing nonsense. It's you're just LARPing. You're dressed up, and you're LARPing, and that's what it is to me because it's divorced from any reality. And sports jiu-jitsu, even though it is divorced from the reality of like fighting in some cases, there's still aspects to it that are 100% real. Like one of the most important things that you get from, say, wrestling, from sambo, from jiu-jitsu, sport jiu-jitsu, and all these different sport judo, from any of these combat arts, boxing, kickboxing, is that you spar on a regular basis. And you have to learn how to cope with that stress that it creates.
Yeah.
Because, the first day, you think about it, the first day you go into the gym, you're exhausted at like a minute and a half of rolling. You look at it and you go, oh man, this is easy. Look at these guys. That doesn't look like it's that bad. Then you get out there and you're exhausted in a minute and a half. You get used to people grabbing on your head. I had like a 300-pound dude that came in for a class the other day, and he's newer and stuff, and I rolled around with him a little bit, and he's like got all of his body weight laying on me, squeezing my head.
Yeah.
And I'm just laying there as if it is the most normal thing in the world to deal with. I'm not uncomfortable. I mean, I'm uncomfortable, but it doesn't bother me. I'm used to it. It's like another day in the office. So like if I ever do get into a fight situation where some guy grabs my head, it's not going to shock my system. It's going to be like, oh, hey, yeah, I've been here before. And so that element is incredibly useful from combat sports. So there's a lot of stuff that, yes, is divorced from the reality of fighting, but still that aspect of stress inoculation that we get from it is massively important because, think about it. If you've never been in a fight situation and all of a sudden you're in a street fight, what's going to happen? Your fight or flight response is going to kick on and you may just freeze up because again, it can shock you in weird ways. There's plenty of situations where people are faced with these fighting situations and instead of responding like an alpha male, for any of you guys listening and not watching, I said that with like a shit-eating grin on my face, like alpha bro, can't stand it.
Yes.
Anyway,
we don't need to get into that.
No, it's so funny. I'm going to take a quick detour. It's so funny.
Of course.
I was reading this newsletter that I follow, and the guy's talking about how all this like alpha male culture is talking about, and I'm not saying that some of it's not true. Like men do have real struggles now that did not exist before at certain periods of time, but everybody's talking about how like, or some of these alpha male cultures, like, oh, men are just this, that, whatever. We would have been so much better off at another time period, right? And I'm like, what time period is that exactly, right? Like one of the time periods where you got shipped off to fight in a war where like millions of people died, or I've seen people where they sort of like talk about medieval times. You're like, oh, so you think you would be like the knight in armor that would be winning the battles and not like the random peasant who got ran over by the the Genghis Khan's horde, right? Like it's like when you get into those people that get into the woo-woo stuff where they talk about their previous lives, like people's previous lives are always like they were some general or some princess or princess. Like nobody was ever the peasant out working on the farm, busting their tail for like next to nothing and dying of famine, right? They always have this grandiose view of it. So, going back to it, I have no friggin' clue where it was, man. I went off on the rant.
I knew it. I knew it. The Apple.
I was going off. I was having fun.
I will say those people are hilarious because I think they're the most insecure people. Like some of the most insecure people, because they're all about like how they look and try to intimidate other people, and they're really
it's all about show.
Like, it's all about show. It's all about show.
Well,
it's like there was a video I saw this big guy. I don't know. He was just like he was trying to intimidate the smaller guy, and the smaller guy's like, "Well, go ahead, come on, punch me." And the guy just started getting real quiet. The big dude, and it was pretty funny to see. But all of it's about like kind of peacocking, intimidation, and hoping the other person backs down. And when the other person doesn't back down, that's when the issues kind of start. That's when you get called down on your shit.
Now, whoops. It's like I was talking to one of the guys who's in the military. Like I've met a lot of dudes in the years who are military guys who've done some stuff, seen some stuff, done some stuff, like whatever. Those dudes are always really quiet, and they'll talk about it if you ask them questions, but they're not going to like talk about it openly. Like, hey, let me bring this up out of nowhere. Whereas like the guys who hadn't really done anything, but maybe served or whatever, like there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong. You didn't do anything. You just didn't do anything. You just did something else. It's when you lie about it that's weird. All of a sudden they bring it up. And it's like I've seen fighters who you'll come into a gym and they'll start talking about this and that and how strong they are, how skilled they are, or whatever. And like you said, it's this insecurity thing. And I feel for them in some ways because I understand where it comes from. As a lot of times as men, I don't know if it's the same for women, but I know as men, and this is kind of a lot of times been true in cultures, men are only valued if they can do something, right? Like just the way it is. It's like, if you think about just as a quick experiment, if you think about a woman who basically does nothing, but she's very attractive and you see this all the time, like guys are just buying her stuff, whatever. We're kind of like, whatever, good for you. But if you see a guy that does it as a man to man, we look at those guys as like, psh, like we look at them as negative. We look at them as less than. Like, dude, like get off your ass, be a man, go do something, right? And that's part of what it is. And so you think about like guys who haven't done anything yet. Again, it's that insecurity because I think it was Robert Bly. I was listening to him recently. I like listening to his stuff, and he was talking about this idea of like inflated grandiosity. And he said that its twin is a sense of worthlessness.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, and so you have this sort of inflated grandiosity, this like, I'm so amazing. I'm this, let me talk about it. And on the flip side, you have this sense of worthlessness, and for a lot of us as guys, right? Like you have to prove yourself. And I don't think it's necessarily the wrong thing. It's understanding what it is, but you got to go out and do some stuff before you feel like, okay, I am someone, I have some leg for my self-esteem to stand on. Your self-esteem is like a stool. And every time you accomplish something meaningful in your life, you get like an extra leg to stand on. Yeah. So if one gets kicked out, you got another one to keep you up. This is why like when I was young, I was super insecure. And so like jiu-jitsu and wrestling was the only thing I was good at. And anytime I lost a match, I would be just awful. I would be just, my self-esteem was in the tubes.
Yeah.
After a while, you get a few more legs to stand on. So if one thing happens, you're like, meh, I'm okay. I'm good. I know who I am, that kind of thing. But I have no idea how we got on that subject. So
alpha male bros took us down the
I said alpha male, and then I went down the rabbit hole, and I have no idea what I was talking about with the alpha male stuff. But I just saw some stuff that made me laugh.
Yeah, people kind of showing. I just think a lot of that with the ending on the alpha male stuff, it's just validation, not having validation and not feeling like you're worth anything. So you basically are telling people kind of like I do these things, but you really don't believe your own shit. I think a lot of it's like those people that say all the like they don't believe that they're trying to convince you.
Yeah.
And if you believe them, then they're going to hopefully feel like they can convince themselves. And that just doesn't work out until you, like you said, until you go and do something, until you do some difficult stuff or go through some shit that's challenging. That's what builds kind of that resiliency. Otherwise you're just, it's all show.
But was there a point that I was making before that? If not,
I don't know.
Well,
I don't know what we're talking about. But well, let's. I knew you went off the rails, and I was like, oh, here we go. I don't know if we're gonna be able to bring this back.
I should have said, hold that point.
What do you think as far as for MMA? What's the best base? If you have to go back to, it used to be jiu-jitsu, right? Everybody's like, jiu-jitsu is the best base to start. I have an idea on this.
Wrestling. I mean, I think if you took a guy, like if you were trying to create, as the landscape is right now, and you're trying to create like the next fighter, I would say you give them a good wrestling base. Yep. And meanwhile, they're training jiu-jitsu too. You know what I mean? Like that's what you would want. You'd want a guy that basically has phenomenal takedowns, has, that ability, that gritty engine, that grittiness that wrestling can develop, that scrambling ability. And then, they get lots of competition experience in wrestling. And then you put them into jiu-jitsu at the same time and get them some there. Now, again, there's a lot of jiu-jitsu gyms that do great takedowns. And so, but I'm saying like when you're talking about generalities, right? Wrestling is going to be a strong base for modern MMA, and then you give them some jiu-jitsu to go along with it so they can finish fights. But I think, wrestling would be a stronger base than jiu-jitsu as it stands right now in the current landscape.
Yeah, I think those guys do really well, obviously.
I mean, look at like the majority of like the UFC champions in the last 5-10 years. Like I don't know what the number is, but it seems like a good chunk of them were wrestlers to start with.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
not all of them, but a lot of them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then look at even in jiu-jitsu, we have a lot of high-level wrestlers that have transitioned really well into jiu-jitsu and are very good at jiu-jitsu. I mean, Brandon's a perfect example.
Brandon, Pixley, two of those guys, they just came out.
Yeah, and those guys had they started a little bit later. They didn't grow up in jiu-jitsu. They kind of grew up in wrestling and then transitioned to jiu-jitsu kind of after their lifespan in wrestling kind of went to an end. So I think
and if you watch the way that they did the way that they got into jiu-jitsu, though, is when they got into jiu-jitsu, they were doing jiu-jitsu now. It wasn't like, this is sometimes hard for the wrestlers because it's not as bad as it used to be, but like a lot of wrestlers, like they're wrestlers, right? I'm a wrestler. They identify with being a wrestler, whatever. Guys like Brandon, guys like Pixley, they quickly learned how to use their wrestling to get to submissions. That became it wasn't their goal just to take someone down and sit there and do nothing. Their goal was to I'm trying to finish people. You look at Pixley has an incredible rate of finish, because he would snap people down into front headlocks and then friggin' sync up his darces and different variations of chokes. And Brandon, became like a really good back taker. So he'll spin around and get around with his passing after the takedown, and then he works to the back to try to get, either the points or the finish.
Yeah. I think those guys, I mean, I don't know about Pixie, but Brandon played jiu-jitsu. You're exactly right. He went and would play off his back and do things that he wasn't really good at initially off the top. And now, he's very good. He's good at leg locks now. He's good everywhere. And you want to be good everywhere, right? Because you're going to end up in these leg entanglements and some of these positions against true jiu-jitsu grappler, like jiu-jitsu guys that have done it their whole lives. They're going to be crafty everywhere. So if you're a wrestler, you're kind of trying to pick up, you're trying to make up as much ground as you can. And I agree that they have such a good work ethic. They're used to the really tough, grindy sessions, I think they have a lot of mental resiliency, wrestlers do. I think it's a great base for a number of reasons. So for me, I would agree. I think it's the best base for MMA. Probably, even if you have young kids, even starting them in some wrestling is really helpful, even in conjunction with jiu-jitsu as well.
Yeah. So guys, at the end of the book, Robert Drysdale has this says, this epilogue, An Apprentice to Alchemy, Aging, and Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay.
And if you guys are familiar with their ideas of alchemy, when people use that term, a lot of times that's you converting your garbage into gold, right? So there's the actual alchemist that would try to convert all kinds of different materials into actual gold. And then there's what most of us do, when you think of taking something bad and you convert it in the way that you're handed a shitty card, and the way that you play the card makes it a good one, right? That's you converting your garbage into gold, right? That's the person, that's like me saying, okay, I got jumped when I was a kid. I was molested as a kid, and I felt all these terrible feelings about myself as a kid, and then I got into all these things to make myself stronger, and then now I get to help other people do the same thing. That's alchemy, right? Taking it and getting something out. Well, in this little sort of ending of it, the book that we've been talking about, he's talking about meeting this this old black belt who's like 90 years old, right? And who needs help tying his belt on. And like he snaps the belt on a little too tight because he almost does it like you do it to a young guy when you promote him. He like puts the belt on and almost knocks this old guy over. And he's looking at it and he's thinking to himself, like, this is what awaits me, right? And because again, this guy's 90 years old. It doesn't matter what you are. If you're 90 years old, obviously life gets a little tough, right?
Yeah.
But he says here, and this is less than a quote, this is more just an idea to chew on to wrap this up. After all, athletic ability has a peak that closely correlates with youth, and as such, at least in the case of something as physical as jiu-jitsu, skill levels must always find their way down at some point. What then? What is left of our beloved jiu-jitsu skills then? Imagine a life on the mats, a life preparing for a Vale Tudo fight, a life of perfecting your athletic ability and skills, only to have it all taken away from you, little by little, in an inevitable sequence of moments. This is a frightening thought, and one that we are quick to dismiss by waving it off as saying, don't worry, that day is far away. We have all the time in the world. We're still young. Of course, we can temporarily wave the question away in such manner, but that day will inevitably come, and this heavy knowledge begs the question of, what was it all for then? And so I'll leave that with you guys. What is it all for then? You know, and this is something I think it's really important to think about because we spend a lot of time on the mats. We do this, and this is something I've chewed on plenty of times. I've talked about this idea. If you could never train, if you could never improve, you know, think about this, like lifting weights as an example. There's going to be a point where you cannot get stronger. Your body is just not going to do it. You can shoot up all the juice you want to. You're just going to be, your body just won't do it. Right. But there's still benefits to lifting, both like health benefits and also mental benefits and things like that. There's benefits to it. So let's say that you were doing jiu-jitsu and we're all focused on progress, right? Everything has to be progress. There has to be this steady march forward with everything, right? What happens when that march stops? What happens when it's more of a slow sliding backwards where, you know, the forces of life push against you and you're digging your heels in, but you just feel yourself basically sliding against the ground going backwards? Why do you keep doing it? Will you keep doing it? If you spent 20 plus years doing it, what was it for? So it's just an idea to chew on. I won't tell you what to think. I won't give you my ideas on it, but what do you think? What was it all for? I'll just leave it with you there because I thought it was an interesting idea. It's an interesting thing in the end of the book, and it's something to reflect on. And again, it's not just jiu-jitsu. You can think about a lot of things, right? We're all here for a limited time. If you were born in America, if you were born in most of the countries in the West, you're blessed. You know, no matter what people might say, this and that, I mean, you're blessed. We get to literally play around and wrestle each other for fun because life is pretty safe and we're healthy enough to do so. And we have the financial ability to do so. You know, we're not working out in the fields, you know, 18 hours a day or something crazy. Like we're working our 8-hour day and then we get to go train or something afterwards. We're blessed. And so you got this blessed life. You get to take around this bucket of bones you got blessed with to live through one time. And then everything that you have, no matter what you have, will be taken away from you at some point. It's going to leave. There's one day that is going to be the last day you train. There's one day where you're going to look at your son, your daughter, and it's going to be the last day you ever say hello to them, the last day you hug them. There's going to be your friends, the last time you ever see your friend, and you don't even know it. You don't even know it's the last time. But there's a last time for everything. What's it all for? Just something to chew on. So I'll end it with that.
That's heavy, man. That's a lot. It's a lot. It's it definitely got me thinking for sure. So guys, with that, thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this thing happen. Charlotte's Web, you can check them out at Charlotte's Web CBD or charlottesweb.com. They make a lot of CBD products, CBN products, functional mushroom products, balms and rubs for sore muscles. Lots of stuff that I've used and I like. And again, I continue to use. I've been using them for over 8 years now.
And again, if you want to check them out, go to their website at charlottesweb.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order at checkout. Also, thanks to our buddies over at epicrollbjj.com. Like all the products and things that we have sponsors of, it's stuff that we actually use or have used or whatever, right? It's stuff we actually believe in. Epic Roll makes great gear. They are the people that make my rash guards and shorts because I like it so much. And again, it didn't happen instantly. I remember Matt a long time ago sent me a package and he wanted to do some business together. And, you know, I liked his t-shirts, but I was like, I don't know, man, I'll get around to it. And then we started working together in a big way back in like 2019, 2020. And I really like the stuff that they put out. And his grappling shorts are my favorite grappling shorts, bar none, out there. And so if you guys want to check him out, whether it's his gear or his t-shirts, his merch, epicrollbjj.com is the website, and the promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order. If you guys want to support us directly, if you like the podcast, if you enjoy listening to it, you listen to it, you know, week after week, and you just want to throw a few bones our way to say thank you and support it, you can do that by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Take a look at the website, take a look at the perks that are offered, find out kind of what you'd like to do, how you would like to support it, and you can do it there. That'll go to us directly. That helps support the podcast, and we appreciate the blessings you guys give us that support us every month with the Patreon as Patreon members. Also, guys, if you want to get my daily email, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. And when you join up, you'll get my daily email that goes into everything from book recommendations to just anything I think might be interesting to you. But also too, obviously jiu-jitsu stuff, right? That goes without saying. But there's a lot of other stuff that's not jiu-jitsu related. A lot of people enjoy that stuff where it kind of gives them a little bit more of a well-rounded thing to consume. And then along with that, you'll get a guide that goes through some different strategies on how to improve your jiu-jitsu faster by being more focused and deliberate with your training. A lot of people, they want to get better, they want to improve, they want to bust through the plateaus, but they're not focused. It'll help give you 12 different strategies on how to get more focused with your training. And you can get that at my website, chewjitsu.net/join. So guys, with that said, thank you for being here this week with us. We appreciate you. Talk to you next time.